Hello everyone, and on behalf of the Broken Bay Institute and the University of Newcastle, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to this presentation. The title of this presentation is Academic Skills, Research and Using Resources. May I also take this opportunity to wish you well in your studies. My name is Zachariah Duke, and I'm proudly employed as the Academic Assistant to the Dean at the Broken Bay Institute. Prior to this appointment, I was a lecturer in Theology and Biblical Studies at the same institution. It is my pleasure to be with you. Firstly, it is my hope that this presentation will arm you with the necessary tools and techniques in order to tackle your assessment items, especially your written assessment tasks, in a more effective way, because as we all know, it's the research that takes most of our time when working on an assessment. However, in saying this, I would always encourage you to make contact with your course coordinator in the first instance about any questions you may have regarding researching, resources, referencing, assessment items, course expectations and so on, as each course differs and has differing expectations. You can find the contact details of your course coordinator on the front page of your course outline. However, I'd be delighted to be contacted via email if you have any specific questions regarding this presentation, and you can note my email contact details on the front slide here. In terms of what we'll cover throughout this presentation, we'll touch on two main things. Firstly, the Bishop David Earl Walker Library, and that's the library at the Broken Bay Institute in Pennant Hill, Sydney, Australia, and what that library has to offer you as a student. And secondly, the University of Newcastle libraries and systems, and what those systems have to offer you as a student. It's probably apt for me to mention that one of the benefits of studying with BBIUON is indeed that you have access to two very rich resources. So a library at the Broken Bay Institute, as well as access to the University of Newcastle library systems. First things first, I'd ask you to pause the audio presentation and reflect on the following three questions. Firstly, do you know where to find information? Secondly, do you know how to evaluate information? And thirdly, do you know how to use that information to write or present a coherent and compelling piece of work? Perhaps your answer to those questions is no, or perhaps yes to only some of them. It is my hope that at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to confidently say yes to all three. The Broken Bay Institute's library is known as the Bishop David Earl Walker Library, and it's named after a previous bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Broken Bay. This particular library has an excellent academic collection relating to subjects such as Christian theology and ethics, biblical studies, Christian spirituality, philosophy, church history, and many other disciplines that come under the larger umbrella of theology. As I mentioned, its physical location is in Pennant Hill, Sydney, Australia. It's open Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, and you can see the key contacts there in front of you, being Heather Lang, the librarian, and Gigi Huang, her assistant. Now, as the library is indeed located in Pennant Hill, Sydney, that's not to stop you using it if you're studying from rural New South Wales, or perhaps interstate in Queensland or Victoria or South Australia, or perhaps even internationally as well. What you'll be able to do is contact the Bishop David Earl Walker Library, state that you're a student, we'll verify your status as a student with the University of Newcastle, and then we'll just simply sign you up as a library student member of the Bishop David Earl Walker Library. That will then mean you're able to borrow a certain number of books and have access to a range of different resources that this particular institution offers. Now this presentation is going to be very hands-on, so I hope that that's okay. So I might just take a moment now just to have a look at the catalogue of the Bishop David Earl Walker Library. As you can see, I've hyperlinked this here, so perhaps you could follow these steps while I'm going through them. Find the catalogue up the top tab here. And for those studying RELT 6006, which is Advanced Studies in Christology, you may know that one of the key texts for that particular course is Edward Schillerbeck's text, Jesus an Experiment in Christology. So I've just typed that in the key search there. You can see that it brings up the first result. Now there must be an assessment due, because as you can see there are no current copies available on the shelf to loan. But what you can do for those that are living in rural and remote areas, should you wish to have that text, the hard copy of that text, what you can do is make contact with the library, sign up, as I mentioned previously, mention the call number of the book or the books that you require, either by email or over the phone. I believe that email is their preferred contact. What will then happen is the library staff will package that up, send it to your preferred mailing address, and then it's just expected that you get it back within the borrowing period. This particular library also offers a range of different useful links that would be helpful for your study. As you can see, some of them here relate to the Roman Catholic Church, but there are others for those that are studying biblical studies subjects or scripture-based subjects, a range of different excellent resources that are available to you. So I'd just advise to take time and pause your presentation now just to look through these useful links that the Bishop David Earl Walker Library offers you. Trove. Some of you may or may not know this particular resource. Now this is, I suppose, external to both the Bishop David Earl Walker Library as well as the University of Newcastle libraries. Trove is basically the catalogue of the National Libraries of Australia. So basically all libraries within Australia would sign up to the National Libraries of Australia, and then this is one mega catalogue, if you like, and I found it in my research to be very helpful, and I'll show you why that's the case now. So I've just hyperlinked here. Now for those who are studying RELT 6007, which is the Theology of Religious Education, you'll note that Thomas Groom's text, Christian Religious Education, is one of the key texts for that particular course. So I've just done the search of that title, that book title, and as you can see here it's brought up these results. And the reason why I find it helpful is you may not necessarily have the time to contact the Bishop David Earl Walker Library, and say for instance if you're working in Victoria, obviously by the time you contact the library and they're able to post the book out to you, it's going to be quite a time, perhaps up to a week or even more. So by using Trove you'll be able to see what other libraries have this particular resource available to borrow. Okay, so you can see here I just mentioned the example of someone living in Victoria, and you can see there that this particular book is housed in 3 libraries that this particular website knows of, Trove knows of. So we can see that it's listed at those 3 libraries. So then that might be more convenient for you to actually go into that library to have access to that particular book. Okay, now it's probably apt for me to note here that, say for instance, you may not have the borrowing rights to Monash University, for instance, but being a public university, you'd be available, or be welcome to go into the library and access the book off the shelf, and then to make any necessary notes or perhaps photocopy a chapter or so on. So the Trove website is a very good resource for that. Now moving to the University of Newcastle libraries. Now obviously the University of Newcastle is a much larger institution to that of the Broken Bay Institute. Okay, so the University of Newcastle currently has over 35,000 students across a number of different campuses. and they obviously have a more extensive electronic resource range, such as journal articles, electronic books, and so on. Now, the University of Newcastle Library catalogue is known as NewCat Plus, and I'll just activate that here. Now, NewCat Plus is somewhat different to the Bishop David L. Walker Library catalogue. The NewCat Plus catalogue is what we call a discovery catalogue. So it's similar to that of doing a Google search, if you will. Okay, so what we might do is just have a quick look here. For those who are studying RELT 6040, one of your key texts for that course is Rethinking Fundamental Theology by Gerald O. Collins. So all you would need to do is type in the book title, and there you can see here that it's listed as a book, so they've actually got it as a print book on their shelves, as well as an electronic book as well. And we'll have a look at electronic books a bit later in the presentation. It's probably apt for me to also note here that there's a range of different other restricted searches that you can put on to refine your search even further. As I mentioned, one of the most frustrating things with research is the time it actually takes to find resources. So the more chance you're able to restrict your search, the more the better search results you'll actually get. The University of Newcastle also offers research guides for each of the different discipline areas, and I invite you to pause the audio presentation now to look at the Theology and Religion Research Guide, and I'll just bring that up here for you now. Now, this particular resource has quite a range of different useful information that will help you throughout your studies. So as you can see in the middle here, it lists a range of different newly published resources. We also see up the top here a range of different tabs, so they list particular journal databases that are relevant specific to the discipline of theology and religion, and a range of different other websites and referencing guides as well. So I'll just encourage you to take time either now or perhaps after the presentation just to make yourself familiar with that very good resource that the University of Newcastle offers you. Now, perhaps at this moment you've heard of these two terms, the course reserve and electronic books. Basically, these are ways in which the teaching staff prescribe particular readings for you throughout the different courses. So the course reserve is basically an area within the university where the library staff photocopies particular chapters or sections within a book and then uploads them on the course reserve system. Similarly to publishers nowadays either publish books in print form, so an actual bound book on the shelf, or an electronic version which is available electronically. So let's now take a look at the course reserve system. Now, to access the course reserve, there's a number of different ways you can do this. You can just simply type your course code within the NewCat catalogue, or if you just find on the University of Newcastle Library homepage, you'll see the link to the course reserve, and if you just simply type in your course code, the course in which you're studying, it'll bring up a list, a range of different readings that the teaching staff for that course have prescribed for you to read. And to access those, all you simply need to do is click on the blue hyperlink text, type in your University of Newcastle credentials, and then the reading itself will pop up as a PDF attachment where you can then either save it to your USB or your desktop or even print it off. So that's the course reserves. To access the electronic books, we'll just use the Rethinking Fundamental Theology example again for those who are studying 6040. So we can see here again the Rethinking Fundamental Theology is published as a book. a print book, a bound book on the University of Newcastle shelf, as well as an electronic book. So those again who are studying in rural and remote areas, you would have better access to the electronic book because it reduces that lag time between you requesting the book and it being delivered to you. So say for instance if you're studying RELT 6040, in week 3 for instance, the teaching team may prescribe you to read chapter 3, which is titled The Human Condition. So all you would simply need to do is click on the hyperlinked chapter that's requested of you to read, and then you can then see the entire chapter provided to you there in front of you. Now you can either read it on the interface here, or perhaps more convenient might be to view the PDF as an attachment, where again you'll be able to save or print it off within the Australian government copyright legislation. So as you can see there, it's opening up now. So there it is in PDF form, again where you'll be able to print it off or save it to an external device. The University of Newcastle, being quite a large library, has reciprocal arrangements with a number of different universities across the country and indeed across the world. So perhaps what you might like to get familiar with is this system called Get It. It's got quite a funky name, Get It, but as you can see, if you click on this particular resource, you'll be able to request books that may be housed not by the University of Newcastle, but perhaps by Sydney University or Monash University or Curtin University in WA. So all you'll simply need to do is complete the automatic fields, and then what would happen, similar to that by requesting a book through the Bishop David L. Walker Library, the University of Newcastle Library would then contact Curtin University, for example, and say that we have a student that wants this particular book, the title of this book. The Curtin University will then, if it's available, would send the University of Newcastle that book, and then the University of Newcastle would then post you that book to your preferred postal address. And again, you just simply need to return the book within the borrowing period. Likewise, for those who wish to request a book that is housed within the University of Newcastle catalogue and are living in remote or rural or interstate or international locations, similar to that to the Bishop David L. Walker Library, you just simply need to contact the University of Newcastle Library through this Get It interface to be sent a book that is housed within the University of Newcastle's catalogue. And again, they would post it to you in the mail, and then it's just expected that you get it back to the library within the 2 or 3 week borrowing period. The University of Newcastle offers a range of different very diverse information guides and research guides, and I'd invite you to pause the audio presentation now and to look at some of these. I'll just bring some of these up now. Some of them don't necessarily relate to the library as such, but student how-to guides for Blackboard, for instance, and as you can see, they're quite extensive in how to submit a Turnitin assessment, how to complete a discussion board, how to reply to a discussion board, online quizzes, and various different other things as well. So again, I'd invite you to make yourself familiar with these particular resources. And finally, with the University of Newcastle libraries, quite lucky we are that we have a faculty librarian. So Ruth Talbot-Stokes is the faculty librarian for the Faculty of Education and Arts, and Ruth is employed to assist mainly postgraduate students, so those who are studying for grad cert, masters, and as well higher research degrees, to offer you research advice. So no, Ruth's not going to write your assessment for you or find all your resources, but perhaps if you're struggling to find resources for a particular question, what you might be able to do is contact Ruth and send Ruth the question that you're being asked to answer, and then Ruth might be able to then point you in direction to resources that might be advantageous for your assessment task. And you can note Ruth's contact details there in front of you. Now the two main referencing styles that BBIUON prescribe are the Turabian referencing system, which is a traditional footnoting and bibliography, as well as the American Psychological Association referencing system, or commonly known as APA, which is the in-text citations in brackets and then the referencing list. So again, I would ask you to consult your course outline just to make sure that you have the choice of using either Turabian or APA, and then encourage you to use whichever system you're most familiar with. Now, going back to those three questions that I proposed earlier in the presentation, I might just spend some time now just going through them. So when finding information, can you navigate academic databases? Are you able to distinguish between a worthless website and a reputable website? As you know, the internet nowadays, everyone has access to it. So any Adam or any Shirley down the road can create a blog on the Bible, for instance, and can upload information, whether it's reputable or not, and have it published on the internet. So it's very important that you have an awareness that particular websites such as ask.com, Wikipedia, dictionary.com perhaps aren't reputable for postgraduate study. Do you know how to use a book without reading every word? Now again, I'll go back to that idea of it is indeed the researching that takes most of our time. So here I would encourage you to read the prefaces or introduction, and this usually paints the picture for the entire book thereafter. So instead of spending the time to read an entire book, whether a slim or a thick compilation, again, the idea is to cut down on that time to read perhaps the blurb on the back, the introduction or the preface, to get an idea of, is this particular resource going to be helpful to me? Do you know how to browse a large library? So here I would invite you to, be familiar with the different call systems that the different universities may use. So most universities across the country use a system called the Dewey classification system. So are you aware of that particular classification system? When evaluating information, now when you found a book that you may think is relevant to a particular assessment item, is it of good scholarship or is it of marginal value? Now these are very important questions you need to ask yourself when you're during the research phase. Is the evaluation that is being formed modern, or is it some kind of time warp? Now what I mean by that is obviously there are many advances in modern scholarship. I would agree to a certain extent that the saying that classics never die, and one example of this would be Lawrence Boat's text, Reading the Old Testament. Lawrence Boat passed away in 2012, and two other scholars come to revise his classic book, Reading the Old Testament, and in their particular preface or introduction they mentioned that, look, when they came to revise this particular book, there really wasn't all that needed revising, and the first edition of this book was published in 1984. And these two scholars were doing this in 2013. So you can see that yes, in some instances classics never die, but there have been quite a lot of advancements in a number of different areas of theology since 1984, for instance. Am I reading with denominational glasses? The problem isn't doing that. The problem comes when one thinks that this is the only way. Okay, so when you're reading and researching, be sure to have an open mind. Be sure to have an open mind. What does the scholarly literature have to say? What has been the history of ideas on the subject under evaluation? What are the current debates about the subject? So these are the three questions that would clearly demonstrate to the marker that you're on top of the subject matter. What am I seeking to argue or present out of my evaluation? So again, touching on that idea of having a clear and very coherent set of arguments. When presenting information, do you have literary skill? Now we know that the best information in the world falls flat if it is written up poorly. If appropriate, have you chosen a good title for your essay? One that reflects the question being asked. Is there an appropriate bibliography or reference list? Or perhaps more simply, have you included a bibliography or reference list? It's amazing how many students lose marks simply for not including a bibliography or a reference list, perhaps intentionally or not. Are there reasonable subheadings that guide the marker throughout your essay? So I found it's very helpful to use subheadings to direct your argument and to guide the reader throughout the essay. Do you have what I've called a railway carriage approach to writing, where there is one engine followed by 30 or 40 carriages? Now what I mean by here, so we can't call it an essay because it consists of a heap of annotated notes that look much more like a freight train, but with no real sense of coherence except being joined together. So do your sets of arguments flow from one to the other, and do you introduce your arguments from one to the other? When presenting information continued, so have you included a good introduction that draws the reader and the marker in? So essentially in the introduction you want to capture the reader very quickly, very early on into your particular essay. Then, is there a relevant conclusion that sums up what has been done and leaves the marker challenged and motivated? I've often found the best conclusions often end with a statement that challenges or motivates the reader. Goes without saying, is there a connection between the beginning and the end? Has the essay proceeded with some sort of logic and rationality? So say for instance, if your introduction, you set out that during this essay I wish to cover arguments A, B and C, and then when you come to the body of your essay you then touch on argument C, A, B. Obviously that doesn't have any logical sequence to it, does it? So it's important to have your essay set out in a logical and rational way. Does the marker feel convinced about your argument? Now here, he or she may not necessarily agree with your argument, but do they feel convinced? Are they convinced by your argument? Can you give appropriate attribution to all material used, both quoted and ideas? I suppose that highlights the necessity for referencing. Again, when presenting information, does your essay have appropriate links between each section and each subsection? Have you taken the time to proofread your script? Now here I'd recommend to ask someone else to proofread your paper. Fresh eyes always make the difference. Does your essay have an attractive appearance? Here I'm not referring to your essay being handsome or beautiful, but indeed first impressions are always critical. And finally, has the relevant academic information necessary for a good answer been dealt with? Or has the writer done a slipshod job with inadequate resources? Here I'm basically referring to, have you included all the recommended or necessary material that perhaps have been set out in your course outline, or perhaps other resources that the teaching team has stressed that you use? Getting towards the end here. Writing an essay is simply a means of communicating ideas, and a lot of students get very panicked by this word essay, but it's simply a means of communicating ideas. And in your essay you are seeking to convey that you have, firstly, understood the task and kept on the topic. Secondly, supported personal opinion with evidence. And indeed that you've shown evidence throughout your reading and research, that you have written your own work, and finally that you've arranged your arguments in a logical order. Now, all essays are created around a structure, and this structure is made up of an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, and in one way they should all feed into one another. A few more details. Be sure to read the assignment details carefully and underline any key aspects that need to be addressed. Before submitting the assignment, reread these assignment details that are listed in the course outline and check that you have in fact addressed all the points that you have mentioned. As I said, please feel free to use any subheadings that clearly convey the structure of your assignment. Avoid using abbreviations in the body of your writing. Check that all your in-text citations and indeed all your footnotes, depending on which referencing style you're using, are included in your reference list and bibliography. Check that any quotations or citations that are used are relevant to the question that you're answering and serve to support the points and arguments that you have raised. And finally, avoid overuse of quotations. Direct quotations, should only be used sparingly. That brings an end to the presentation. I hope that you found it useful, and again, I'd invite you to contact your course coordinator in the first instance if you have any problems or questions regarding any of what we've discussed here today. Thank you, and all the best.